Meet the computer you can talk to. With Copilot on Windows, working, creating, and collaborating is as easy as talking. Got writer's block? Share your screen with Copilot Vision to help spark inspiration, and use Copilot Voice to have a conversation and brainstorm ideas. Or maybe you need some tech help. With Copilot Vision, Copilot sees what you see. Let Copilot talk you through step-by-step guidance so you can master new apps, games, and skills faster. Try now at windows.com/Copilot.
Previously on The Girl in the Pond.
On the way back up, they saw a couple dudes next to the pond that they ended up finding her in.
That's where they seen another guy over in the same spot where they found Hazel's hat and gloves, just about 20 feet from the shore, moving around through the bushes looking as if he was looking for something.
I'm Jessica Marshall.
And I'm Patrick Tyne. This is The Girl in the Pond, Episode 8, Pond Guys.
'Tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone, all her lovely companions.
Our last episode ended with some startling new information. Well, at least it was new and startling in mid-July of 1908. It came from witnesses who'd come forward more than a week after Hazel's body was found in Teal's Pond. William and Libby Huffy had been riding up the Taborton Road on the night of July 7th, 1908. As they passed Teal's Pond, they saw two men. One in a Concord wagon with yellow rims parked by the side of the road. The other rifling through the bushes near the pond, where Hazel's body was pulled out of the water 4 days later. Mark Marshall, the Rensselaer County resident who devoted much of his time in retirement to researching this case, and Bob Moore, the Sand Lake town historian, well, they told us they think these pond guys are Hazel's killers. It was such a climactic moment in our reporting, Patrick and I had to sit down together to unpack it. We've finally gotten to the point where we've revealed who Bob and Mark think the killers are, which is huge. There are two men acting strangely by the pond around the same exact time that Hazel was alleged.
They weren't supposed to be there. They're out of place.
Right.
After all of this, and this was known at the time, why wasn't this a bigger deal?
This is pretty damning.
Oh, for sure.
Sketchy as heck.
Extremely.
We're going to get to these two men and where that all led later in this episode. But we need to rewind a bit first. There are more details we need to get into to help put it in the proper context. One of the biggest questions in this case, besides who killed Hazel Drew, is why was she in Sand Lake that night? It's a question that no one could answer until late July of 1908, almost 3 weeks after the body was found. In the last episode, we mapped out Hazel Drew's movements in the final days of her life. From newspaper reports, it appears that she took a train to Albany twice in 2 days, July 6th and July 7th, the day she died. She told witnesses she met at the train station on both days that she was heading downstate, possibly to New York City. But both times, she immediately hopped a train back to Troy. There's evidence that she briefly met with a mail train conductor, John Magner, during at least one of those trips.
Like, how would you describe her movements? Like, was she acting like frantically, just like kind of like whipsawing through all these different cities, like over the course of like a day? Like, what was this seeming like time crunch she had put herself under?
I feel like it depends on how you tell the story, right? Like, on one hand, it can seem like she's, like, frantic, right? Like, she's going back and forth between Troy to Albany. She's allegedly meeting people here and there. But on the other hand, if you look at it a different way, it can be a very, like, calm and calculated, like, planned out. She's just executing a plan that she had, built up over a period of time and really thought out. So I think it could go either way. There's just not enough real, direct evidence. We don't have like CCTV footage of
Right.
her like running through the train station or like freaking out or whatever.
What would the state of this plan look like a week from then in her mind? What was she hoping? Where was she hoping to be a week from that day?
Right. Was she hoping to be like well entrenched in her new New York City life? I mean, the thing about John Magner, I think, is what convinces me that she, you know, she had a concept of a plan and she was trying to execute it, right? Like, you know, if you want to go to a new city and you don't know anybody there, but like somebody introduces you to someone that might be able to like, I don't know, set you up with a job or set you up with an apartment or just even tell you where to go when you first get down there. Like that seems like a smart thing to pursue, right? And if the only way, because we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have email, the only way to catch this guy would be to take a train to Albany or to Rensselaer or to wherever intersects with his daily route, to catch him for 10 minutes when he's like, you know, on his little break. That makes sense.
I think that's fair. Absolutely.
Let's say we buy that Hazel really was planning to go down to New York very shortly. Why was she in Sand Lake that night? That is the big question. And one of the things we posited very briefly at the end of the last episode was that maybe she was going to say goodbye to someone because she has family there or friends. I don't know. That seems like the only plausible, given what we believe she was doing, the only plausible reason for her to be out there, right? You know, she checked her suitcase. Everything seemed to be ready to rock and roll to get down to New York. Like, why was she in Sand Lake?
Was this not part of the initial plan in her head? It was just a spur of the moment decision. Where
I have to tie up all my loose ends.
Yeah, I have to do something because this is weighing on my conscience, and there are people that I care about, or at least one person in particular who's going to be baffled. Like the adults in her life, I don't know that she felt like she owed a lot to them.
Yeah.
That it would be much harder for a young person,
Maybe a child.
it would be harder to that to process, and also maybe that indicates that she was planning never to come back.
The question of why Hazel was in Sand Lake the night she died, it all becomes a lot more clearer when you look at it through the eyes of a child. We've talked a lot about Hazel's family in earlier episodes. We talked about her parents, her Aunt Minnie, her Uncle William, her older brother Joseph, and his wife Eva. Hazel was the second oldest child in her family behind Joseph, but she also had 3 younger siblings. The youngest was only 11. His name was Willie Drew. And it turns out Willie was also in Sand Lake the night Hazel died. He was at a farm right up the road from Teal's Pond.
The revelation that Hazel had a kid brother living on a farm in Sand Lake only came to the public's attention 3 weeks after her body was found. The first mention of her little brother in any newspaper articles that we could find was July 29th, and the Times-Union never even mentioned him at all. William Montgomery Clemens and the New York World, however, were all over it. Here's a bit from the World on July 29th, 1908.
Detectives Powers and Unser reported to District Attorney O'Brien today that they had found 2 new witnesses who are expected to shed light on the mysterious murder of Hazel Drew, whose body was found in Teal's Pond. One of the witnesses is known to be Willie Drew, the little brother of the dead girl, who, at the time of the murder, was staying at the farmhouse of Mrs. Libby Sawalski on Bear Road, about 2 miles from Teal's Pond. The dead girl was devoted to her brother. It is said that she thought more of him than any other member of her family. And the belief now is that on the night she was slain, she was on the way to the Sawalski farm to tell her brother goodbye, she having decided to leave this part of the state.
According to newspaper reports, 11-year-old Willie Drew had gone to Sand Lake that summer to live and work on his uncle William Taylor's farm. But Willie and the elder William did not get along very well, it seems. Willie ended up leaving his uncle's farm to stay with another family a little ways down the Taborton Road, the Sawalskis, specifically Libby Sawalski and her 20-year-old son, Tom. For Mark Marshall, Hazel's reasons for going to Sand Lake on July 7th, 1908, are clear.
She was only coming out here for the day to see Willie and say goodbye to him before going back to Troy and then taking off into New York City.
By all accounts, that's what Willie Drew believed too.
I knew she'd never leave without saying goodbye.
Willie spoke to reporters that week. He'd come back from Sand Lake to live at his parents' house in Troy. And here he is quoted in the New York World on July 29th, 1908.
I went to the officers today and told them all I knew. It was not much, but I made them believe that Hazel would not have gone away without saying goodbye to me. I'm sure she was on her way to Mrs. Sawalski's when she started up the road that leads past the pond.
A few days later, Hazel's mother offered more evidence that Hazel was in Sand Lake to see her brother that night. Julia Drew testified at the coroner's inquest that Jarvis O'Brien would ultimately call.
Hazel came to me on the morning of July 3 and asked where Willie was staying. She remarked that when she went out into that neighborhood again, she would go to see him. We did not discuss the matter any further. And until now, it had not occurred to me that Hazel might have been going to Mrs. Sawalski's home.
This is where I just wanted to point out that, this has all happened, comes out that she's got a little brother that she wanted to say goodbye to 3 weeks after, the murder was discovered. And for that 3 weeks in the media and even with the investigators themselves, they're throwing out theories that, of course she went to Sand Lake to meet a lover, or, she went to Sand Lake to do something, naughty with a boy. Like, ultimately what happened was not the first thing that people thought of.
What's more likely? You're going to say goodbye to a relative versus, I'm having some sort of salacious affair of some sort. Just going off of the Occam's razor of the most likely thing. Most people aren't actually engaged in these incredible, secret affairs and subterfuges versus, most people, have family that they care about, to some degree, and certainly siblings, although, I'm an only child. I don't know anything about that, but I know that that would make more sense than some convoluted theory.
Right.
That reporting would also have to acknowledge that Hazel Drew is a person with
she's human, right?
She's human. She's very human, and that doesn't really work as well.
That she's human and that she has a story. It's a much better story, right? From a, entertainment standpoint, if you're well, she went out there to have a salacious affair by the pond. The public wanted a juicier story, a juicier reason for that. And it just doesn't seem like it was there, which, might be why the story fizzled a bit in the public eye.
Okay, so now we have a good sense of why she was in Sand Lake the night she died. But we still haven't pieced together why or how she was killed. For that, let's finally go back to pond guys. The ones William and Libby Huffy said they saw on their way home that fateful night of July 7th, 1908. Here's Mark Marshall.
The reason we think that, and we come up with that conclusion, was because the detectives, after hearing Huffy's story, started hitting the livery stables and looking for this Concord wagon.
Remember, we talked in the last episode about how William Huffy didn't initially go to the authorities about what he'd seen. Instead, he told his friend, the liquor store owner, about what he saw, who told his brother, the bartender, who told one of the county detectives on the case. That detective, Duncan Kay, then went after the lead.
They actually found a Concord wagon that was rented down in Troy with a bay mare horse with a dark mane and tail, the same as what Huffy's described. And so they found it in Shy's stable in Troy. They looked at the rental book, and they seen that the horse in the buggy was matched up and rented out to go out to Avon Park by a guy by the name of Bill Cushing.
Bill Cushing. This is the guy who picked up the carriage on the afternoon of Tuesday, July 7th, 1908. And he'd returned it around 10:30 that night, according to the log. That wasn't the only name associated with the rental, though. The day prior, a man named Fred Schatzel had called to reserve the wagon for Cushing. Bill Cushing and Fred Schatzel. Who the hell are these guys? Neither of them were ever mentioned in the Times-Union article. They weren't in any New York World articles either. In fact, we only found their names in one newspaper, a small newspaper called the Troy Daily Press. The very brief mention of Cushing and Schatzel was buried in the middle of an article from July 22nd, 1908.
The facts are that Fred Schatzley, embalmer for Undertaker Thomas H. Nealon, telephoned to the livery Monday night, July 6th, for a horse and carriage for a friend, William Cushing, the Republican committeeman for the 11th Ward.
Hold up. Say that again? William Cushing? The Republican committeeman for the 11th Ward? Cushing was a politician? A Troy Republican? The same machine that District Attorney Jarvis O'Brien and all his detectives were part of? By the way, the Troy Daily Press was the only media to print this guy's name in connection with the Hazel Drew murder case. The Troy Daily Press was a Democrat-leaning paper, one of the only ones in town.
As we said, the names Bill Cushing and Fred Schatzel were never printed in the Times-Union. But the Times-Union did print something interesting on July 21st, 1908.
This morning, the district attorney was closeted for over an hour with a man who was not known to any of the newspaper men in the building or attachés. The district attorney was most careful not to let the newspaper men reach this stranger, too, and he helped him to get out of the courthouse by means of a private exit. The man was seen, though, and was of medium height and had a sandy mustache, but he managed to elude the newspaper men. Mr. O'Brien admitted that the stranger had been in consultation with him on the Hazel Drew mystery. During their conference, the district attorney sent for the Troy Directory and also for County Detective Kay. On other days, the officers have been most willing to tell what they were going to do and where they were going, but today they professed to be in ignorance of their movements. After the newspaper men had left the district attorney's office, the detectives and officers were summoned to Mr. O'Brien's office, and each left the building singly and in different directions.
That was not normal for O'Brien, at least when it came to Hazel Drew's case. He was an open book every day on practically everything else about that case. Why was he suddenly tight-lipped about a stranger with a sandy mustache? Remember, William and Libby Huffy said the guy in the Concord wagon had sandy hair and a mustache. I have to say it like mustache.
Of course, because you're twirling it. Was the guy O'Brien was shielding from the press William Cushing? And if it was him, why? Mark Marshall spent hours poring through old Troy phone directories and public records to find out more about William Cushing.
So we started investigating into Cushing. Who was he? And we found out that he actually grew up where Hazel lived in South Troy, only 2 blocks away from her. Hazel's girlfriend, I found out, lived next door to him. Okay. One of her best girlfriends. And then we also found out that Eva Drew, before she married her brother, Hazel's brother, worked right next door to him, Cushing. So when you're in South Troy, everybody in South Troy knows everybody there.
Remember Hazel's first boss, Thomas Hislop? He could have also been the connection point for Hazel and Cushing.
And Hislop was president of the Young Republican Club in South Troy. So he probably had meetings, Republican meetings, at his house. Cushing probably went to the house and got to know Hazel that way.
Bill Cushing, William was his full name, was 26 years old at the time. He was the son of Irish immigrants. As we mentioned, at the time of Hazel's death, he was in politics, a Republican representing Troy's 11th Ward, that's South Troy. According to an old Troy phone book, he seemed to be working as a bartender at a saloon downtown. What about Fred Schatzel? Mark researched him, too. He was about 30 in 1908. He was also a Republican committeeman in South Troy. He worked for an undertaker. He was the guy who embalmed dead bodies. He was married, and he had a little vacation house. Where? Yes, out in Taborton, near Teal's Pond.
Let's assume that Mark Marshall's theory is correct, that William Cushing and Fred Schatzel were the murderers. If Hazel went to Sand Lake to say goodbye to her little brother, how did she end up at Teal's Pond with these guys?
Hazel was a flirt. That was one thing that was known about her. All the guys in Troy that they interviewed all said the same thing, that Hazel was a flirt. And I think she flirted with Cushing and Fred Schatzel to get them to take her out to see Willie and bring her back to Troy.
Remember, a witness saw Hazel walking east along Congress Street on the morning of Monday, July 6, 1908. She was at Congress and 3rd. Cushing worked at a bar on Congress and 4th, 1 block west. Could Hazel have been downtown asking him for a ride to Sand Lake the next day? It looks pretty sus. All of this circumstantial evidence kind of lines up to suggest that it's plausible that Hazel asked William Cushing for a ride and Fred Schatzel arranged for the carriage and they went out there together. I mean, we wouldn't be doing this podcast if it were a sure thing, right?
No, of course.
The case remains unsolved, so, but this is definitely shaping up to be a plausible theory.
It's the most plausible theory we have so far.
The detectives found out, looked in the Troy directory and found out where Cushing lived, went to his house, must have been at night because they said they woke him up, and they asked him where he was with the horse and buggy that on Tuesday night. And he said, yes, he was out in Sand Lake. He admitted. And he said, but he didn't go any further than the corners here. He said he took the wagon and rented his friend Schatzel, set the rental up for him on Monday for him to pick it up on Tuesday to take his girlfriend for a ride out into the country. And he returned it after 11 o'clock.
Did he name his girlfriend?
They didn't name his girlfriend, which would have been helpful to us. That's a 2-hour drive out here, and actually a 4-hour drive back and forth to take your girlfriend for a ride in the country. That's why we didn't buy that story.
The investigators bought it, though. They bought it that this Bill Cushing guy rented a carriage that looked exactly like the one William Huffey described. They bought that he drove his girlfriend out to Sand Lake around the same time Hazel was seen there. And they bought that it was just a huge coincidence. Here's the full paragraph about Cushing and Schatzel, the only mention of them in any media, from the Troy Daily Press on July 22, 1908.
Hiring of rig explained. The hiring of a rig at William T. Shine's livery has been thoroughly explained. It had nothing to do with the mysterious death of the Drew girl. The facts are that Fred Schatzel, embalmer for Undertaker Thomas H. Nealon, telephoned to the livery Monday night, July 6th, for a horse and carriage for a friend, William Cushing, the Republican committeeman for the 11th Ward. Mr. Cushing and a young woman went driving the following night. They were at Sand Lake, but not in the vicinity of Teal Pond.
Almost as quickly as Cushing and Schatzel were identified, investigators ruled them out. We'll be right back.
The decisions made at the state capitol in New York impact all of us, from our property taxes to the cost of health care or our civil rights. It's all really complicated, but I'm here to help you sort through it. I'm Dan Clark, author of the Capitol Confidential newsletter from the Times-Union. Find that at capitalconfidential.com. That's capital with an O. capitalconfidential.com. See you there.
We are always busy here in the Times-Union newsroom, whether it's covering breaking news, writing in-depth features, or giving the latest local sports highlights. There is a lot that goes into what you read in print and online at timesunion.com and on all of our social channels. So join me, Jessica Marshall, every week on The Eagle, a Times-Union podcast. We'll pull back the curtain and go in-depth on the news that we're covering and the award-winning journalists who bring it to you at the oldest and largest newspaper in New York's capital region. Listen to The Eagle at timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Girl in the Pond.
As Times-Union journalists, we do not engage in slander. We cannot accuse or paint any living person as guilty who hasn't been proven so in a court of law. Cushing and Schatzel were neither accused nor convicted of the murder of Hazel Drew, but they are deceased. Technically, we can't slander the deceased. And given the circumstantial evidence that we've learned about their involvement in this case, we feel justified in speculating. So let's say for a minute that Cushing and Schatzel were the murderers. Why would they kill Hazel Drew? Were they hired by the political machine to carry out a hit because Hazel knew too many dirty secrets? Were one or both of the Pond guys spurned lovers out for revenge? It's really hard to say for sure. But of course, Mark Marshall and Bob Moore have a flushed-out theory. And just to give you a fair warning, some of the details may be disturbing. So listen on with care.
Well, I think what happened was they went through South, after he picked Hazel up at the Union Station, they went through South Troy and picked up Fred Schatzel. And the two of them probably had a bottle with them, making a day of it. And what they did was they went to South Troy, picked up Fred Schatzel, and then headed out 66 out this way here. And I think Hazel took him into a back road that goes into Taperton Road instead of coming through the corners here, the busiest place in Sand Lake, because she really didn't want to be seen with him.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean,
Yeah.
if that's
and there's a road over here called Wisner Road that runs into Oak Hill, and then Oak Hill is what they called a new road back then that comes into Taperton Road, and that's just about where Hazel was seen by the Romans picking the berries. And I think once Hazel got to Taperton, she realized she was in a bad situation with these two guys, and then actually started an argument with them and got out of the carriage at Oak Hill and Taperton Road, and then started walking up Taperton Road on her own. And these two guys came down back in Sand Lake here, realized that Hazel just used them, to get them out here, out to Taperton Road, turned around and took Short Road, which is across the street from a Crooked Lake Hotel, and took Short Road up to Monroe Road, which was beyond Teal's Road, to cut her off and then find her.
Do you think it was a crime of passion, or was it premeditated? Like, what do you think?
I think it was a sexual assault.
Okay.
I think the two guys came up and got on the Glass Lake Road to try to catch up with Hazel as she was walking towards the Swalski farm. The Teal's Pond we found out was a favorite place of Hazel's, and it's also halfway in between Taperton or Sand Lake and the Swalski farm where Willie was. And I think when they came down through Glass Lake Road trying to retrace where Hazel was walking to Swalski's, they ran into Hazel in the back of the pond, seen her down in the cow path, pulled into the logging road, and then Hazel had no place to go. And the reason I say that the assault happened at the back of the pond and nowhere else, that she wasn't brought there dead, because they found her glasses, or a newspaper reporter found her glasses on Tuesday at the base of a rock at the cow path. So she wore these pincher type of glasses with no arms. And if the assault happened someplace else, the glasses would have been somewhere else.
Right.
And so that the glasses were found at the pond means that that's where the assault happened.
So how do you think she died, right? Because there's questions about...
Well, that's a good question. I brought this along here. This is a small version of what they call a slapjack.
A slapjack is basically a leather strap with a lead weight sewn inside one end. As far as weapons go, a slapjack does not look deadly, or even particularly mean. Some look like old-fashioned police batons, others could be mistaken for fancy bookmarks. But in the right hands, and swung with enough force, these weighted leather straps can easily crush a human skull.
Bartenders and saloon keepers usually kept these in their boot and stuff to break up bar fights. And they have a slap. They're made out of lead in these, and they have a handle on it like this.
Mark flipped the leather strap around in his hands. I may have winced a little at the intrusive thought of someone getting hit with it.
This is a smaller version of it, but they were made to deliver a bone-crushing blow without cutting the skin. Wow. And this is just the exact same mark that Hazel had in the back of her head.
Okay.
At the base of her skull, and it was in the occipital lobe.
That's convincing. Remember, William Cushing was a bartender, so it's not crazy to assume he would have had one of these and used them to arbitrate barroom disputes.
So I think what happened was the guy got out of the buggy and wanted her to pay up for her flirting, to take him out. She would make it worth their while if they rented a wagon and brought her out here. And so they started handling her, and then Hazel started fighting back, and she was getting ready to scream, and Cushing hit her in the back of the head with a slapjack, which he would have had because he was a bartender and a saloon owner. Mm-hmm. And then Schatzel, being an undertaker, knew just how a woman's undergarments were, knew enough to go underneath her skirt and rip the ribbon from her corset cover, and then wrap it around her neck and choke her.
We have to go all the way back to the second episode here for a second. The doctors who performed the autopsy were adamant that it was a blow to the head that killed Hazel Drew. But Mark's theory does explain the ribbon around her neck. One of the autopsy doctors said it would have taken her about an hour to die from a blow to the head like the one she received. In the heat of the moment, they could plausibly have tried to choke her to finish the job quicker.
The timeline of when Huffy's seen the guy in the other side of the pond is only half an hour from when Hazel was seen at the hollow.
Okay.
So if it took over an hour for her to die from the back of the head, and then she's in the pond when the Huffy's seen the guy there, she would have drowned, and she didn't drown. There was no water along, so she was dead before an hour's time was expired.
Oh wow!
So that's why I think she was choked.
William Montgomery Clemens of the New York World was also convinced she was choked to death. But District Attorney Jarvis O'Brien and the doctors who performed the autopsy dismissed it.
So let's sum this up. Mark Marshall, and also Sand Lake town historian Bob Moore, believe that Hazel convinced William Cushing and Fred Schatzel to drive her out to Sand Lake on the evening of July 7th, 1908, so that she could say goodbye to her little brother Willie before she started a new life in New York City. They stopped at Teal's Pond. Now, we still don't know why, though many people that detectives interviewed said she thought it was a nice place to hang out and she'd go hang out there whenever she was in town. Maybe she wanted to see it one last time, who knows. But when they got to the pond, one of the guys, or maybe both, tried to sexually assault her, and she fought back. One of the guys hit her with the slapjack in the back of the head. One or both of them wrapped her corset ribbon around her neck. And when she was dead, one or both of them threw her body into the pond. And then they went back to Troy and pretended that they had nothing to do with Hazel Drew's murder. When the Huffy's story came out, detectives figured out Cushing and Schatzel rented the wagon. They confronted them, and then they let it go.
We will never know why Cushing and Schatzel were cleared, unless some earth-shattering evidence suddenly appears to shed light on it. If they were the killers, perhaps it was a cover-up by a political machine trying to protect its reputation. Perhaps it was shoddy investigative work. Perhaps it was the rampant sexism of the time. Perhaps it was all three. We'll never know. Let's assume like the counterfactual for a minute and be like, these two guys were charged. That would have been like such a scandal. It would have just been like a bomb went off.
Yeah, that would have shattered Republican politics.
It just would have been and then maybe every other like comparatively like penny ante scheme, going on in Republican politics, whether it's like, the treasurer screwing with money or ballot box, any of that, all of a sudden that all gets like super magnified.
Because at the time, as we learned from Kathy Sheehan and other research, that the Democrats were rising in influence, with the influx of immigration and the immigrants, taking jobs in the police force and other influential parts of town. Like, the Democrats were poised to topple the Republican machine any day now. So the threat of something that would make it easier for that to happen, you might want to avoid that at all costs.
William Cushing died about 5 years after Hazel's murder. He dropped dead of heart failure. He was 31. A few years after Hazel's murder, Fred Schatzel was involved in the suspicious death of his boss at the funeral parlor. He was never accused of anything. He died in 1944 at age 66.
Since Cushing and Schatzel were cleared as suspects, the case was still ongoing. By the last week in July, District Attorney Jarvis O'Brien had made a decision. He called for a coroner's inquest, finally, to once and for all determine the cause of Hazel Drew's death. The media had all but written off the cause of death as murder. O'Brien and his detectives had been investigating it as if it were a murder. But on July 27, 1908, when the inquest finally began, O'Brien called his first witness, a doctor who argued that Hazel killed herself.
What bearing he can have on the case was only surmised at first, but the impression has gone forth that District Attorney O'Brien is going to take refuge behind the suicide theory. The reason for committing suicide has been hinted at, that the girl was in a condition that she feared to face the world with and went to Teal's Pond to hide her shame in death. Other physicians, it is also asserted, are to be sworn, and they will probably also advance the idea of suicide.
Next time on The Girl in the Pond.
Well, even Jarvis O'Brien, I think, was using Hazel's death as a fallback. If he couldn't prove who killed her, he told the doctors that they couldn't say that she was choked.
We always say you got to do weird choice shit, otherwise weird choice shit happens to you. And it is the truest thing I've ever known, right, about the city.
'Tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone. All her lovely companions are faded and gone.
The Girl in the Pond is a production of the Times Union. It's produced by Jessica Marshall and Patrick Tyne. Written and edited by Jessica Marshall. Editorial direction and fact-checking by Erica Smith and Casey Seiler. Production help from Daniel Roberts, Sarah Diodato, David Johnson, and Mike Goodwin. Special thanks to Tony Pallone, Bill Douglas, Arlo Harrison, Roebling Harrison, Rick Marshall, and Kathleen Moore for lending their voices. Our theme song is The Last Rose of Summer, written by Thomas Moore. Musical arrangement by Matthew A. Streifert. Vocals by Josephine Diodato. Additional music supplied by Lionel Cohen, Francois Couture, and John Alderson via Getty Images.